Wrath of Angels. Chapter 3. Scene 1. The docks. Aboard the former ship, the Spear of Caliban. Month 3, year 260, the 41st millennium. The Wrath's docks yawned wide, steel ribs still sharp with the smell of fresh welds and sacramental oils. Beyond the cyclopean doors, void black hulls ghosted past like whales breaching a night ocean. A sanctioned Imperial troop transport, flanked by a brace of lean escort cruisers, nosed into the cradle on thrusters, whispering like prayer. Its flanks bore the winged sword of the Dark Angels, stark against the lacquered black. Latch lamps pulsed green, grapnels bit home. Docking clamps engaged with the shriek of chains pulled tight across a giant's chest. Pressure equalized through the lockways in rolling breaths that made the deck hum underfoot, as if the ship were breathing in strangers and deciding whether to keep them. Silence held the bay the way frost holds a field. Chaplain Malchadek waited with 3 watchers drifting at his flanks. Their little hands were folded, their cowled heads did not move. Malchadek's crozius lay across his breastbone like a bar. Wax had dried along the haft and cracked in tiny veins that matched the pale lines across his knuckles. His bone-colored tabard stirred in the recycled air. He said nothing. The watchers said nothing. The silence was total. No mortal crew yet moved in these halls. Amber runes winked to green. The hatches groaned open. Out strode bone-white Deathwing veterans, helms veiled by gauze blessed to snag ill omens. Warblades and storm maces caught the incense light and threw it back as dull, righteous glows. They moved as if the deck remembered them and adjusted to their weight. Behind came black-armored Ravenwing, steps heavy with the promise of hunts. Their pauldrons carried chips of desert salt and ash from roads ridden long ago. Their engines, though cold, exhaled ghost heat and the thin tang of hot oil. Last came the Greenwing tacticals, bolters slung, standards furled, the Legion's spine. Their tread was a drumbeat of war, measured, unstoppable, the sound that lands learn to fear. Behind the angels filed the chosen mortals, serfs shuffled with brows marked in ash. Astropaths walked in single file with their scored palms bound in linen, heads bowed as if listening to something in the floor. Officers, chosen for loyalty rather than ambition, kept their eyes down. Their rank tabs had been deliberately dull-edged, so pride would have no surface to cling to. There were no chains. Duty was chain enough. Faces were pale. None cried out. All understood. This was not a deployment. This was a burial in steel that still drew breath. Cargo followed on grav pallets with the patience of coffins, reliquaries bound in too many chains, caskets sealed in lead and lacquer, statues of angels with faces chiseled away to namelessness. Mechanicum adepts in red robes crooned Binharic hymns from vox grills that shed incense smoke like quiet weeping. A rack rolled by bearing helms, whose visors were sealed with parchment strips, stamped with a single word in black wax. Remember. The rack shivered as it passed beneath the vaulted lights, and the lamps answered with a flicker like an eye that refuses to open all the way. A tech adept's auspex hiccuped and began to squawk. He struck it, gently first, and then with professional irritation. It coughed numbers that argued with themselves and died. The adept made the rite of silence with trembling mechadendrites and let the device hang limp from its strap like a scolded child. A mortal woman near the pallet line, Lisa, once a laundry hand on a Shrine World 1 jump from the maelstrom, pressed a torn rosary into the seam of her sleeve so the beads would not show. She mouthed the old harvest prayer her mother had taught her in fields that smelled of dust and wet earth. The words sounded wrong here, echoing off steel ribs that did not know seasons. She kept them anyway. When the helms marked "Remember Past," she thought of graves without markers and said the names of her dead into the seam until the syllables blurred, a necklace of sound with no beads left. Jask, once a winchman on a hive dock, where a man's worth was measured in lifts, survived. Now a serf in ash grey counted bolts in the deck to keep the fear from his hands. 27 to the nearest hatch, 42 to the altar dice. Numbers were honest. He clung to them like rungs down a long shaft. Incense fought weld oil in his nose and made a taste like blood on copper. It reminded him of hive lifts, warm rust, old cabbage, a hint of ozone when the brakes complained. Familiar ugliness steadied him more than prayer. The bay's atmosphere shifted. A deeper shadow detached itself from the far lock as a Mechanicum heavy transport slid into a secondary cradle under a veil of flickering void shields. Its cranes extended like antlers. Slings groaned. Between them hung a shape under tar-black canvas, stenciled with interdiction sigils and warning glyphs that had to be repainted as fast as they burned away. A Knight Castellan. The cranes protested in 3 registers at once. A child's keen, a man's grunt, a beam's basso moan. Sparks fell in slow curtains. Serfs scrambled to scatter salt lines in curling trails, not to bless, but to stop the deck from answering in a tone that meant, "I do not consent." Auspex slates near the pallet lines flickered with contradictory mass readings that argued like drunk jurors. A Magos tapped one screen with a little hammer. The display steadied into honesty, and then, offended, went black. The Castellan's arrival became a procession within a procession. 3 magi advanced abreast, swinging braziers of burning copper that turned the air metallic on the tongue. One chanted the weight of every chain in High Gothic, naming not numbers but virtues, fidelity, burden, consequence. The second recited a roll of forges and lineages, every syllable a coin pushed across a table to pay an old debt. The third sang in numbers only, primes and unsolved equations, rhythm so strict that the space between notes felt like doors closing and opening in the hull. Mortals trembled. A scribe clenched his stylus until the bone tip snapped and ink bled a bruise into his lap. A cook's mate dragged a nail across her palm and pressed a wet thumbprint to her brow, inventing a vow no one had asked her to make. An old man from a desert world shut his eyes and named his camel herd in order, the only litany he trusted. An astropath tipped her head back, mouth open as if drinking in rain. A watcher drifted close and lifted a tiny hand before her eyes, and her jaw closed with an audible click. The woman blinked, and all she tasted was iron. At the hangar mouth, the knight paused on its slings. A watcher drifted forward so slowly it did not seem to move at all until it was simply there, a hand's breadth from the black canvas. It raised its small palm like a judge. The chains trembled, slackened, a single deeply taken breath, and tightened again in a single groan like a confession forced through clenched teeth. The watcher lowered its hand. Mortals swore later they had seen its hood tilt, as though it had weighed the Castellan on a scale none of them could read. The Magos with the hammer clicked his vox grill. His voice came thin and layered, as if many mouths spoke through one grate. Oath remembered, oath concealed, oath broken, oath sealed. Mortals heard nothing but static. Malchadek heard every word and filed them like tally marks that would one day be read aloud. The knight vanished into a sealed hangar, whose doors shut with care rather than haste. Watchers arranged themselves before the threshold, like punctuation marks at the end of a complicated sentence. The transport's engine noise dwindled to a patient thrum. Now descended Commander Seraphiel. He came without drama, and so created it. The dock seemed to hold its breath as he appeared on the ramp, power cables and flag cords receding from him like weeds from a blade. His armor was bone white and scarred, the scars not polished out but inked in with subtle script. His burgundy cloak hung heavy and moved with the whisper of sand down a glass. His right arm ended in a master-crafted power fist, the metal engraved with lines of Calibanite script so old the letters looked like riverbeds. Chains, oath scrolls, and reliquary seals dangled from his chest and hip. He walked as if the deck knew his stride and had been waiting to match it. Mortals who had never seen him discovered something uncomfortable in their own throats. To them, he looked less like a man than a statue that had changed its mind about being stone. Several bowed without thinking. One serf went to his knees and pressed his forehead to the deck until skin split and left a clean line of blood. Another covered his ears, as if the cadence of the commander's steps were a prayer meant to burn the unworthy. Seraphiel noticed none of them, or rather, he saw and accounted for them, as one sees and accounts for the wind. Beside him strode Librarius Commander Varadiel, in azure plate scored with wards and little chains that carried bone sigils clacking like rain. He bore his force staff like a banner at rest. The gem at its head breathed with an animal's slow contentment. As he passed lumen strips, light bent away from his edges, as if embarrassed to be seen by him. His eyes held a thin, seawater glow, not bright, only undeniable. They advanced through a corridor that parted for them by instinct. Malchadek inclined his hooded head. The watchers drew in close, 3 points of black gravity around 3 tall suns. "Seraphiel, Varadiel," Malchadek said, voice pitched for the ship's bones as much as for ears. "The wrath breathes." Seraphiel extended his left arm. Malchadek clasped it, steel biting steel. Varadiel joined, covering their hands with his own. The Triad's clasp locked into a knot of white, black, and blue. They did not speak immediately. First they breathed, a measured rhythm, 3 in and 3 held and 3 out. Their knuckles struck vambraces 3 times. Not a knock, not a blow, something between. Each dull chime paced a heartbeat apart. They held silence for the count of 3. The watchers joined the rite. One raised 3 fingers and lowered them one by one with the breaths. Another tapped its palm once against the deck, and the sound went traveling along the hull like a messenger with a sealed letter. The third simply looked up, and far above the nave, the stained glass flickered as if something vast had passed behind it, blotting a sun one could not see. Only then did Seraphiel intone, "Steel." Malchadek answered. The single word weighed and set down, "Soul." Varadiel closed the ring, his voice a low chord that seemed less heard than leaned against. "Sight." The bay did not cheer. It did not dare. Instead, the vox hum cut out. Not a failure, an acquiescence. For a heartbeat, the deck leaned toward the Triad the way a listener leans toward the soft part of a story. The torch's flames steadied. The smell of oil snapped into clarity, as if the air had chosen to simplify itself. Jask, forgetting himself, mouthed the words in time and felt ice rise in his chest. He had said something no mouth like his should say. Lisa pressed the hidden rosary until bead edges bit her skin, and decided pain was a fair tax for hearing holiness with factory ears. The astropath, who had almost drunk the air, bit her tongue until the taste of copper chased out every other thought. The procession resumed beneath the new pressure of a decision made. Deathwing squads peeled to assigned galleries, with the choreography of old stones being rolled back into place. Ravenwing riders followed lines chalked by techs, engines coughing like polite coughs in a church. Scouts ghosted to reconnaissance galleries and vanished as if the ship had pockets sewn for them. The Greenwing unfurled one banner at last. Not high, not boastful, just enough to let the cloth drink a little dust from the altar step, then furled it again with care that looked like tenderness and was discipline. The cargo train creaked forward. A reliquary no larger than a book soared at its lashings and bobbed, weightless, for half a breath. 3 watchers drifted beneath it, palms lifted, and the thing settled without hands. A glass tube drifted by with a single feather floating inside, turning so slowly that the motion looked like the memory of motion. A sword swaddled in parchments, thicker than armor plates. A helm scorched long ago with a 7-pointed star, and then scrubbed until only the shadow of the mark remained. A cracked bell that refused to chime on the right note, though the line of tech priests struck it in sequence with tuning forks that remembered perfection. Crooked roads, a Ravenwing rider muttered, palming ash across the nose bridge of his helm. Good. He checked the range on his auspex and snorted at what he saw, adjusting the calibration with 2 knuckle-quick taps, as if swatting pride off a lens. A Greenwing sergeant and his counterpart drilled stevedores on the right way to carry a boxed relic, so the chains would not kiss the deck. The lesson was simple and delivered without cruelty. If chain links touched the hull, the ship would speak, and the speaking would not be kind. The men learned quickly. Fear tutors well. Taskmasters, Seraphiel said at last, not raising his voice and thus making the docks lean nearer to collect the words. Quarter the serfs. Choir mistress, seal your vaults. Ravenwing, engines stowed, scouts to the galleries. Deathwing, first watch on the shrine and the vault approaches. Begin. The order rippled outward like rings from a thrown stone. It did not need to be repeated. The Wrath took it as identity rather than instruction. Malchadek stood as the last of the reliquaries slid past. The cracked bell wobbled on its frame as though reconsidering old offenses. He watched it, expression unreadable under the hood. Varadiel felt the ship's attention move. Not to him, never to him, but through him. Like the tide's backwash over a stone that refused to be moved, and yet admitted the water's shape against it. For a blink between breaths, he smelled wet earth after summer rain and the ghost of sap. For a blink more, he felt the absence of a chapel that should have stood where he stood, not absence like a hole, but absence like a footprint in dried mud. He did not mention it. He had learned not to name things that would only become truer for the naming. The escort cruisers outside bled thruster heat and backed away, their hull lamps dwindling to patient stars. The troop ship settled deeper into its harness and seemed to sleep. Inside the Wrath, torches guttered down to clean flames, and the stained glass high in the nave dimmed from miracle to merely beautiful. The cranes folded their arms and tried to look modest. The watchers remained. They put themselves where they always did when something had been decided, between the mortals and the nearest doors. Malchadek lifted his crozius and let its head rest, for a moment only, against the bell's cracked lip. He did not strike, he only set weight. The bell gave a single note that climbed and descended at once, the sound of a wound remembering the knife. It was not loud. It was undeniable. Men who had done wrong, or would do wrong one day, felt their chests hollow and fill with cold air, for a heartbeat only. Then it passed, and the dock remembered how to be a dock. Steel, Seraphiel had said. Soul, Malchadek had answered. Sight, Varadiel had closed. The words lingered like heat over an anvil. The Wrath listened. Then, in the long way a mountain moves, she nodded. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 3, Scene 1, The Docks. Chapter 3. Scene 2 follows.